Mikey P, Mike Brabozzi in the Money Media YouTube channel. Another Kentucky Derby prep for the big weekend. And bring in with me again for another Derby prep breakdown, Mr. Nick Tammaro, who has, he's the morning line maker at Keeneland. Nick, we're going to talk bluegrass. So you certainly have a stellar, I think, jump on everybody looking at these PPs.
Yeah, I probably knew the field of bluegrass before anybody other than the Keeneland Racing Office. So who are the ones that alerted me who was in the field. So yeah, I made a set of PPs on Monday night to kind of go over this line. And I will tell you, Mike, for a field of 7, I had a devil of a time with it. Probably people out there that are thinking you seem to have a devil of a time with every race. But with that said, it was a tough race, really, where, 5 horses look like contenders. And when you've got a 7-horse field where that many are contenders, it can get pretty difficult.
Yeah, and I saw that you kept it pretty tight for those contenders for this Grade 1 Bluegrass, going a mile and 1/8 at Keeneland. And let's start with a horse that certainly last year was all the rage at Keeneland in East Avenue. Went to the Breeders' Futurity off a blowout maiden win and just blew that field away, winning by 5 lengths, enough to make him the favorite in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And we know how that turned out whenever he ended up not breaking very well from the rail. Came back in the Risen Star and ran another stinker. Now he gets blinkers. He's still in here. They're trying to get into the Derby with this guy. What's your thoughts here? Do you think he can turn it around?
I as a rule, I can't stand taking horses off of inexplicably bad efforts where there was just no excuse. And so I'm not a fan of that by any means. I guess the story with this horse is he just needs the lead. And he is not the same horse when he doesn't have the lead. We couldn't really determine that based on the juvenile, given that he broke poorly and he was so far back. And it wasn't as if he even had a sniff of the lead. There was no pace in front of him either. But, he was sitting in the garden spot in the Risen Star, and he was supposed to just burst by those horses like they were nothing at about the quarter pole. Instead, he went for the exits and was nowhere to be found. So Brendan Walsh brought him right back 12 days later, got him back on the racetrack, worked him, went on with his business. And now here he is looking for redemption over a racetrack where A, Brendan's horses generally excel, B, Brendan's horses generally get heavily bet, and C, in a situation where he should be on the lead because they're putting on the blinkers. I'm assuming they've worked him in blinkers. That probably led to those 2 bullet workouts that we saw at Fairgrounds. And Luan Machado gets on for the injured Tyler Gaffalione. I think it's pretty clear that if you're putting Luan in this race, who rode this horse to victory once before, you're going to the lead. And that's where he's likely going to bring forth his best effort.
Hopefully second wire finish there. He might be in front.
But he's going to need to Luan's got to be told, right, like 10, 12 times along the way. Ride it out.
What do you think his price is here? I know that we're sticking with him a little bit, but he certainly has, like we mentioned off air, he's taken a ton of money so far. And now the mustard's sort of off the hot dog here. Can you get 4-1 maybe on East Avenue?
Professionally, I hope that he's 3-1. But, Mikey, I got to tell you, I don't know. I think he could be 7-2. I think he could be 5-2. I'll ask you a question. Doesn't this feel like the horse that the CAWs come in on late? He's probably got the most speed. He's got a huge local number. A 95 as a 2-year-old colt in October is huge.
Yeah.
I could see him being 4-1 walking in the gate and 5-2 on the backstretch. It's not going to surprise me at all. I ended up and we'll talk about these horses obviously so perhaps actually this is better for like a wrap up kind of thing. But I think what I expected to see when I pulled up East Avenue's PPs is what I ended up seeing. It was just that I had to sort of eschew everything that I've always believed in as a horse player to make the morning line, because he's not a horse I would bet. I don't like betting horses off of no excuse horrible performances, but a lot of people out there are more forgiving.
Yeah, agreed. Well, he's going to have plenty of company, I would think. There's some speed around him. We'll go to River Thames next, and this is Todd Pletcher here for the WinStar folks. Raced, I thought, extremely well on the Fountain of Youth, coming off 2 straight wins. Came off Lasix, got tracked down in the last basically 3 steps by Sovereignty. Sovereignty ended up second in the Florida Derby, But the first time stretch out, I thought this horse raced very well. He seems game, wants to fight for it. If you go back even, to his 1X win, he got laid on almost the entire way around the racetrack and was able to kick late. So he certainly has talent. He's got the rail. What's your thoughts on him here?
Yeah, ended up sort of dueling into the ground 2 starts back, a subsequent stakes winning sprinter. If this horse can take his game from Gulfstream, he's the horse to beat, in my opinion. I did not go into making the morning line in this race thinking I'd end up putting him favored. But when I saw his PP lines and how much he's been bet, it ended up making the most sense to me. The horse has 390 plus Beyer speed figures. His running lines look good in terms of how he performed, how the horses around him performed along the way as well. Todd actually has very good numbers coming off LASIK, so it's no surprise that he ran as well as he did last out. And, I don't think the bloom's off the rose on Sovereignty at all. So I thought he made out poorly at the post draw. Obviously, it's a 7-horse race, so you don't want to use that as too much of an excuse. But I think they would have really preferred him be in that sort of outside stalking role that I think Irad may ultimately get him to by letting the 2 speed horses clear off and then probably trying to angle out from that point, because the balance of the field is made up of horses that want to do their running from a little bit deeper in the pack.
Yeah, and he kind of did that last time too in the Fountain of Youth, was able to, kind of sit back and let the speed clear, and then he ended up with that outside trip. And he could do that here, but I think from the rail was a little bit tougher. I'm sure we know East Avenue is going to go. What about Owen Almighty? He has certainly shown speed and has done his best work when he's been on the front. We were talking off air, and you mentioned like this horse doesn't necessarily need points here. I know the trainer is sort of dicey about going into the Derby. At least he said that. The owners are going forward. I would say that depending on what Owen Almighty does, doesn't that affect what the 1's trip is in the race?
Yes, absolutely. It does. And I don't, do I think that Jose is going to make things more difficult on Irad? I don't. In fact, I think the opposite. I'm not saying they're colluding, but I do think that Owen Almighty will be ridden forwardly. I think the key to this is that what you're supposed to do if you're Owen Almighty's jockey or his connections is say, East Avenue may get the lead in this race, but it's not going to be because we let him have it, right? We're going to make him work to that first turn in order to get clear, because that will probably soften him up in the latter part of the race. So you're supposed to let Owen Almighty get out of there. He's got some natural speed. Make East Avenue work to get in front of you. If he does, he does. And then you put yourself in a stalking spot and see if you're good enough to even put a charge into him or win the race in and of itself. Because the thing is, if you're going to have any success in the Derby, you need to be able to rate from off the pace anyhow. So that's probably what you do here, given that, the hay's in the barn on you getting into the field. As much as Brian Lynch wanted to be prudent with this horse and keep him at shorter distances, it's very tough to tell the connections of a horse that just won a Derby prep by open lengths, slow pace or not, that, oh, by the way, we're not going to the Derby. So I think this is a horse that is capable of being in the Derby field. He's probably deserving of it at this point. I don't know if he's quite good enough to win this, and I don't know if he can do it without the lead, and I just don't think there's a scenario where he gets the lead.
Yeah, you will get paid, though, if he does win, because I do think he ends up getting lost on the board here with all the other big names in the race. So if you do like him, you're going to definitely get some separation in multis for sure if he finds a way to improve off that last race. And he's certainly a game type too. He does want to fight for it, and I do appreciate that about him. The problem is the trip in here, because he's going to have to fight off some of the closers, namely Burnham Square, who I know we talked off air. You mentioned that you do like him in this race. Raced okay in the Fountain of Youth after 2 pretty nice wins at Gulfstream, but made that move, an early move, and ended up flattening out. And Sovereignty certainly ran by him like he was standing still on the turn. I know you seem to, you mentioned off air, you do like him. You think he bounces back here?
Yeah, I think they probably need to just take the more risky approach of letting this horse drop out and make one run. And I think his dull final quarter mile, half mile or so last out was because he was too close to the pace. And I just don't think he has any speed. I think he's a horse that needs to be allowed to run at a much more moderate early clip. And I'm a pace figure believer. This horse ran a 130 pace fig last out to the 6 furlong call. And he had run a 121 and a 109 before that. So, just hadn't had to expend that much energy early. And I think when he was put in that scenario, dealing with fresh horses later that had sat farther off of it, he was unable to stave them off. Ian's kept him busy. Obviously, Ian Wilkes is a guy that likes to run his horses, but you always figured he would make his final prep more at home in Kentucky. So I think he's dangerous. I think he's one of the probably 2 or 3 horses I would use on my my picks.
Well, he's going to have to maybe hold off maybe the horse from even further back in Chancellor McPatrick. For Chad Brown, Flavien Prat was all the rage at 2, couple grade 1 wins, and then the juvenile really at an outside post, never really got into it, but nobody really closed that day except for Hill Road. Came back in the Tampa Derby, looked to me like he was loaded at the top of the stretch, but didn't really go forward, and Owen Almighty kicked away from him. Now, did he need that race? Is he going to step forward at 3, or is he a one-turn, one-run type sprinter?
I mean, I think he's a one-run, one-turn type sprinter, and I'll tell you, the addition of blinkers last out definitely sharpened him up early in terms of where he was positioned. He actually didn't quite run as fast early as he had in some of his races as a 2-year-old, but he didn't have enough fight in the final quarter of a mile to me to lead me to believe he really wants to go a distance of ground. He looked like a horse that was sort of one-paced for the most part down the stretch, and that's a concern. Right, that's got to be a big worry because he's going to need to make up ground in here in order to be successful. I wonder as well if he was maybe an early developing 2-year-old that hasn't quite gone on with it now at 3. We're going to find our answers to all these questions. I'm not taking him at a short price, but I will tell you, Mikey, I was amazed. It completely eluded me that Patch Adams was favored in the Tampa Derby. Mm-hmm. I looked at these PPs and was like, wait a minute. So Chancellor McPatrick and Owen Almighty were not favored. And I had to think for a second to remember who it was that was favored. And I remembered it was Patch Adams. I was like, holy cow. It actually surprised me that the public was as soft on Chancellor McPatrick as they were, because I understand his running line in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile is not all that sexy, but he was supposed to take a little bit more money than that because Patch Adams was not coming in off a good race. He was coming in off a dull race at Oakland in the Southwest. So I feel like Chancellor McPatrick and Owen Almighty together are the horses that could, I think, kind of elude people wagering-wise. They could slide up the board maybe a tad. It's hard to say that a Flavien Prat, the Chad Brown horse, is going to drift up in price. But I think the concerns about him and this trip are becoming a little bit more plentiful.
Well, these Derby prep videos are all sponsored by Twinspires.com. And you want to check out Twinspires tournaments right now. And the tournament scene at Twinspires has really exploded. They have qualifiers every day to jump into these big contests on the weekend. So this weekend, April 5th, $800 Bluegrass KDBC qualifier. Well, that's the $5,000 Kentucky Derby betting challenge that has a huge prize pool, guaranteed $250,000 with BCBC seats, Kentucky Derby tickets as prizes, NHC seats. So you want to get in on that big contest. And also, the Twinspires is offering a way to play the grade 1 gamble. So that's next weekend at Keeneland, $3,500. So plenty of contests in Twinspires.com for these Derby preps and this Derby prep season. So jump to Twinspires.com, go to the tournament tab, and get involved every day. Well, Nick, we have lots of Derby preps over the weekend. This one, I feel the most intriguing price-wise, depth-wise. Where are you going?
I think at the expected prices, I would take Burnham Square and give him an opportunity to rebound from that performance last out in the Fountain of Youth. I think he's going to run better back at home in Kentucky, and I don't think he'll be bothered by a wet track based on what we've seen in his pedigree. So I could see him making a big move late and wearing him down and hopefully getting a big share of it.
Yeah, you mentioned the weather and the wet track. We really haven't talked about it on this video, but if you look through the PPs, I'm not seeing any wet track experience for any of these horses. So that just adds one more thing, especially with all the rain in the forecast for the weekend. I'm going to try Chancellor McPatrick only because I do think he gets a setup. I do think he has upside. And I do think that if he can get some of that form as a 2-year-old into the 3-year-old year and prove that he can handle the 2 turns, that this is kind of the place where you maybe want to get him. He's certainly going to have speed to chase. There should be no excuses. Prat shows up here. So if not, I do think that maybe he'll be off the trail and be directed to the shorter type races. Maybe he shows up in the in the mile race on Derby Day or some shorter likely engagements. But this is his chance to jump on the Derby trail. So I'll try chance of McPatrick. Hopefully it may be like the third or fourth choice in the race. I do think that if you want East Avenue, now's the time to get him. He's back at Keeneland. He's going to be on the front. Maybe he bounces back in this race. Well, Nick, always great to talk to you for these Derby preps. We have plenty of videos, plenty of analysis, and I know you have a lot of your analysis on twinspires.com also.
Absolutely. Gulfstream Park and Santa Anita Park expert picks for every racing day. So looking forward to another big weekend of racing, and enjoyed spending this time with you going over some of these races. It's a great prep weekend by far, and will certainly get us geared up for that final 4 weeks leading up to the Run for the Roses. And we'll definitely enjoy your morning line for Keeneland for the entire meet. This has been a production of In the Money Media. Check out the YouTube channel. Check out the audio side. Plenty of action leading up to the Derby. We'll see you guys next.